Good afternoon. Welcome to Pérez Art Museum, Miami. My name is Adrienne Chadwick, and I'm the Deputy Director of Education here at PAMM. Thank you all for joining us for our second annual collaboration with artists in residence in the Everglades, or AIRIE as we call them. This year, we are closing out Earth Month here and kicking off maybe the climate march over at Jose Marti Park. I'd like to thank Anita Bram, our adult program manager, and Deborah Mitchell, AIRIE's executive director, and the whole PAMM and AIRIE team for organizing this program today. And also thank you to all of our panelists for being here and presenting this great program for us. Today, we're going to start our presentation with a talk by Bill Maxwell, and that will be followed by a panel discussion, and we will close up with a short Q&A. So I'm going to introduce all of our panelists. Pedro Ramos, Everglades National Park Superintendent, began his federal career as a student trainee with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Rural Development, formerly Farmers Home Administration in the state of Vermont. He served as the Community Development Manager in the U.S. Virgin Islands until 1997, when he returned to Vermont to serve as the Director for Administration for the state of Vermont, New Hampshire, and the U.S. territories of the U.S. Virgin Islands. In 2001, Ramos transferred to the National Park Service as Administrative Officer at Big Cypress National Preserve. In 2005, he was named Deputy Superintendent there and was appointed Superintendent in 2009. Throughout the years, Ramos devoted much of his time in establishing strong community relations with many park partners in South Florida and working to balance the multi-use congressional mandate at the preserve. Wetland ecologist Stephen Davis is a native of Ohio. He earned his PhD from Florida International University in 1999 with research in Florida Bay and coastal Everglades. In his role as Everglades Foundation's ecologist, Davis draws upon his 20-plus years of Everglades research experience and 10 years of experience as professor of wetland ecology at Texas A&M University. Among his foundation duties, Davis leads science efforts focused on Everglades restoration planning, ecological forecasting of restoration scenarios, and impacts of sea level rise. Jessica Cattelino is a cultural anthropologist and associate professor of anthropology at the University of California, Los Angeles. She is the author of prize-winning ethnography, High Stakes, Florida Seminole Gambling and Sovereignty, and numerous scholarly articles about South Florida. Cattelino returned to the region in 2012 to conduct ethnographic research on the human stories of the Everglades. Research was funded by the National Science Foundation, Warner Grand Foundation for Anthropological Research, and writing grant from Howard Foundation. Cattelino has worked in web content and development for the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian and has volunteered at the archives of the Seminole Atataki Museum here in Florida. Adam Nadel, artist, is an internationally known photographer and curator. He has designed, produced, and toured his photographic exhibitions domestically and internationally. His last major exhibition, Malaria, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, was opened in the United Nations headquarters in New York by Secretary General Ban Ki-moon in 2010, and then he toured 4 continents with 10 venues, such as the Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago and Hotel de Ville, Paris. AIRIE artist Elisabeth Condon is a painter, traveler, and Chinese scroll aficionado whose work reinterprets Chinese principles of balance for an information-saturated world. Condon was selected as artist for the inaugural Night's Art Challenge sponsored solo exhibition at AIRIE Nest. I remember that, opening on April 30th. She received the 2015 New York Pulse Prize for the body of work she created during a 6-month residency at the Swatch Art Peace Hotel in Shanghai in 2014. Deborah Mitchell, AIRIE director and today's moderator, is a Canadian artist, just like me, and a curator based in Miami Beach. Her work has explored man's precarious relationship with nature since 2006. The works seek to expose natural wonders while igniting general curiosity for our cultural resources. As an extension of her practice, she has taught adjunct in elementary school science lab and directs AIRIE Incorporated, the artist in residence in the Everglades, which has resulted in numerous community outreach projects. Her work was published by Dr. Laura Ogden's book, Swamp Life, by Minnesota Press in 2011, and will be seen in her forthcoming project entitled The Everglades Book in 2017, this year. And finally, I'd like to introduce our presenter, AIRIE fellow and journalist Bill Maxwell, who was born into a migrant farm working family in Florida. He attended Wiley College, Bethune-Cookman College, and then earned a full fellowship to the University of Chicago for his master's. After serving in Vietnam as a U.S. Marine, he taught English, writing, and journalism at 15 different colleges or college institutions. Currently, he is a Tampa Bay Times correspondent focused on topics such as social injustice, migrant labor, race, environmental abuse, intolerance issues, and public education and literacy. Please join me in welcoming Bill Maxwell and our panelists.
Good afternoon. I'm going to be very brief, and I want to say I'm going to do something that most of the people up here cannot do today. We just talk about politics. We live in a state that is a peninsula, 3 sides surrounded by water. And it seems to me that water should be a no-brainer in the state of Florida. However, it is politics. And so I want to just say a few things about this. Pedro is, of course, is the superintendent at Everglades. And we have Steve here, who is a scientist for Everglades Foundation. So they can't talk about what's going on in Tallahassee the way I can. And they can't talk about the guy in Washington the way I can. So I want to say a few things about this. You know, the top of the totem pole in Florida is pretty rotten when it comes to the environment. So everything that Steve does, everything that Pedro does, will not amount to a hill of beans if the wrong people are in office. And right now in Tallahassee, the wrong people are in office making water policy. And I think that you all know that. How in the world can anyone who lives in the state of Florida, a place surrounded by water, not care about it? We live in paradise, and yet we have people who are making policy that do not care about paradise, in my estimation. And I've been doing this now since 1980, writing about the environment in Florida. And I have seen some improvement. We had certain people come through, like Bob Graham, for example. When Bob Graham was in office, we saw improvements. We saw things get done. But over time, depending on who's in office, things deteriorate. And right now, we have a person who wants to actually assign a policy that will allow oil drilling off the state of Florida. And guess what? That person also comes almost every weekend to Florida, West Palm Beach, a place called Mar-a-Lago. But yet and still, we have people who want to do things to the state of Florida that we cannot withstand. So I want to say this is that if we can do anything that is sensible, that one thing is this, is to make sure that we elect people. We put people in office who are going to make sound water policy. There are people right here in Dade County, Miami-Dade, who are on your commission, on both of your commissions. We have people on the Water Commission who are not making wise decisions about water policy. We have king tides here. Anyone who lives here knows damn well that we have a water problem. And yet, they go and vote and create policy that in no way does anything to help the water here. And so today you're going to hear people talk about the beauty of the Everglades and the region. And I repeat, it would be spitting in the wind. Everything that you will hear would be spitting in the wind if we had people making policy that had no regard for what they're talking about. And so this is my introduction. And I know Pedro can't do it. Stephen can't do it. So I just did it for you. Start becoming political and vote for people who are going to make sound policy. If you don't think this is real, just wait a while and watch what our president does by signing initiatives. Just watch it. We're going to have good, sound policy eviscerated with the stroke of a pen, and that should not be. So as we go forward, please talk to your neighbors, talk to your families, and talk to your children. We need to put people in office who are smart, who understand Florida, who understand the Everglades, and write sound policy. And I hope you enjoy the rest of this program.
Thank you, Bill. Can you hear me? Thank you, Bill. Well, welcome. There are no other Everglades in the world. That's what Marjorie Stoneman Douglas said. And today we're going to hear many different views on why they're important to our esteemed panelists. I do want to mention that the image you're seeing behind me of Jenny Larson is from the Voltage Factory. It is not yet edited, but was so beautiful I had to include it in today's presentation. Jenny is a choreographer who was in residence with us just this last January. Since 2009, when AIRIE expanded from hosting residencies and park-based activities and events to producing exhibitions, lectures, and cultural events at partnering venues throughout the region, we've gained an international reputation as one of the most dynamic and contemporary artists in residence programs in the U.S. park system. AIRIE is unique from other residencies in national parks because we deliberately seek artists who want to engage in projects that are interdisciplinary, research-based, or experimental. Artists selected from an international open call create challenging multidisciplinary projects while immersed in the Everglades wetlands, forest, and coastal waters. To move into the topic today about getting the water right, I first thought it would be interesting to find out a little bit about our recent past. But before I do that, I would like each panelist to say a quick hello and why they're here, so you hear from somebody else other than me in the next few minutes. Adam, would you like to start?
Adam Nadel. A number of the pictures up on the screen will be mine from an exhibition that AIRIE helped support. So I think that's why I'm here.
I'm Jessica Cattelino, and I'm a sociocultural anthropologist and collaborated with Adam in a kind of interdisciplinary project that produced the exhibition that's currently in the Everglades National Park.
Hi, I'm Steve Davis with the Everglades Foundation, and just briefly about our organization, we're a nonprofit, science-based organization solely focused on restoring the Everglades ecosystem from Orlando all the way down to the Florida Keys.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Pedro Ramos. I'm the superintendent for Everglades and Dry Tortugas National Parks. I'm the lucky guy that gets to go to that office every single day. Huge responsibility. I don't get to do that alone. I have my little assistant, Sarah Ramos, here with me, my daughter. Sarah, please stand up and be recognized. She comes to work with me a lot and cares a tremendous amount for this work that we all do. And other than that, I'm just AIRIE's #1 fan. What can I say?
I'm Elisabeth Condon. I'm an artist, and I'm here to discuss the effects of art on environmental awareness as a neophyte environmentalist.
Thank you so much. Well, has our outreach been effective so far? Measurable metrics are a challenge to produce, but we do know this. Magnus Ottoman, seen here repurposing a billboard, teaching a painting workshop during our Sundays in the Park series, and then finishing a mural at 2500 Biscayne Boulevard.
The Hudson, I'm humming to the passing trains, and I no longer miss the silence, but I miss your eyelids flickering. Should we give up?
Okay, and that was Laura Gibson, who sandwiched her AIRIE residency between tours of Japan and Europe, and she was seen there with Michael Stock on WLRN. Our wild billboards on State Road 112 in Wynwood, Little Haiti, and the Tamiami Trail generated over 8 million views and still counting. There are some stills there from the various locations. On those stills, you'll also see our Weird Miami bus tour, which was sold out, featuring Christina Peterson, who actually works here at the museum, has a lot of fans here. We also had Jason Hedges and the lovely Reverend Houston Cypress from the Love the Everglades movement gave us a very, very special installation that day. It was a great example of what we can do outside of the park. Later, you're going to see what we're doing inside of the park. We're very, very happy that Radio Caracol highlighted our programming to their Spanish-speaking followers recently. Here are some photos of our recent Sundays in the Park with Jason Hedges again, his groundbreaking installation down at Flamingo. Archival Feedback's genius demonstration. I do believe we have Tom Wheeler in the audience. Want to raise your hand, Tom? Thank you. Tom and his partner Emily were in residence last year. And also in that upper, well, it's your upper right-hand corner, you're going to see a small photograph of the TM sisters. They're also a Miami-based duo who are in residence right now as I speak, and as recent as Thursday, went out with our park hydrologist, I believe it's your hydrologist, Steve Tennis, and they discovered a small whale skeleton. Would that be a pygmy whale skeleton, Steve? Yeah. So that's a great example of some of the unusual things that can happen when you're in residency that it's very hard to predict, but the TM sisters seem to be really making the most of their time. Internationally, Brookhart Jonkheel's luminous geodesic sculpture was enthusiastically received at the 2017 Indian Art Fair in Delhi, India. Brookhart, would you raise your hand? There he is. Thank you for joining us. And also, Joy Biddle, who was here last December, recently installed Mangrove AMA at the Centre Georges Pompidou in Metz, France. Her landscape of mangrove and marshes was greatly influenced by the cypress domes in the Everglades. The huge diorama is constructed from figments of memory, field observations, photo archives, and collected stories showing the evolution of her process. Locally, we are keeping things fresh with our new bus stop pop-ups, courtesy of a grant from the Miami-Dade Department of Cultural Affairs. These two were selected recently of works from Elisabeth and Adam, and they're very close to the museum here. As you leave, you'll probably see one of them. So they're an experiment that we're trying. It's our goal to do more of that kind of local programming where we can actually marry a visual arts image with that of music. So if things go well, maybe next year we can have a piano beside the bus stop and you can have a quick cultural arts encounter.
That sounds very civilized.
I know. Very excited about that. So can the arts be an effective tool to increase environmental awareness? To understand that, we should first understand the biological explanation with Dr. Davis, then establish a sense of place with Dr. Cattelino and Mr. Nadel. I think that when we truly understand a place, we can love and protect it. Miccosukee, Seminoles, fishermen, farmers, cattle ranchers, that's just a few of the people that actually live off of the land, which is why I selected that video that you saw upon entry, if you didn't come in late, called the Herbert Hoover Dike, made by Christy Gast in 2011 to open the presentation. Christy was the president of AIRIE from 2009 to 2014, and in the video, she incorporated her own body into the landscape of Florida by tap dancing along the perimeter of Lake Okeechobee by the way of the Herbert Hoover Dike. Through these musical interactions, the 140-mile-long structure is transformed into an instrument, recontextualizing the conventions of engineering. So let's hear from our biologist, Dr. Davis, about why people who do not necessarily visit the Everglades should care about its health and restoration.
Thank you, Deborah. I don't know if you want me to take that or...
Oh, sure, absolutely.
So Deborah mentioned Marjorie Stoneman Douglas's quote about there are no other Everglades in the world. She wasn't an ecologist or a botanist, but yet she was quite right in recognizing that the habitats across the Everglades were unlike anywhere else in the world because it was a collection of habitats that you'd find in the temperate zone, whether they're cypress forests or slash pine forests that you find up north. Sawgrass plains, tropical hardwood hammocks with mahogany and gumbo limbo that you might find in the Caribbean, or coral reefs, mangroves, and seagrass beds that you find across the tropics. These are habitats that don't like to get too cold. We have these across the Everglades, and it's this collection of habitats that gives rise to the unique fauna that we have associated with the Everglades, and it's the damage that many of these habitats have ensued because of the way these habitats interact with the natural fluctuations in water as that water is delivered to the Everglades that has changed the habitat quality and has affected the populations of many of these species. It's the only place in the world where you can find alligators and crocodiles coexisting outside of a zoo. We have more than 70 threatened or endangered species of animals currently that reside in one or more areas of the Everglades. So this is an imperiled place. And what restoration seeks to do is bring back the water in a much more natural way to the ecosystem, and that involves both the quality and the quantity and the timing of that water at which it's delivered. Whether you get out to the Everglades or not in South Florida, it's important to recognize that when it rains out there, when you see those big booming clouds in the summertime developing over the Everglades, those clouds that create the convection that brings those onshore breezes that we all love in South Florida, it's that rainfall that's replenishing the aquifer that's underneath the Everglades, the Biscayne aquifer that we all depend on for our water supply. And we often refer to millions of people in South Florida that get their water from the Everglades, but think of all the hotels, just here in downtown or out on the beach. All of those hotels are connected to the same water supply that provides water for our houses. If you drive to Everglades National Park, you might see many of the water trucks out there that are irrigating those agricultural lands in South Dade. The same goes for further north. All of that water is coming out of the Biscayne aquifer. So it's an impressive water supply, but it's also something that we can risk losing if we don't provide that water. Currently, we're dumping much of that water that used to flow south from Lake Okeechobee. This is a picture from last summer, water that's being sent from Lake Okeechobee out the St. Lucie Inlet. You can see that pretty stark contrast between the tidal waters and the black water coming out of Lake Okeechobee. We dump, on average, about 1.5 billion gallons of water each day from Lake Okeechobee. That water used to flow south to the Everglades, to Florida Bay, the Florida Keys. This past year, because of the surplus of rainfall that we got in January and February, we dumped the entire volume of Lake Okeechobee down the Caloosahatchee and St. Lucie River. The numbers are just extraordinary, 500 billion gallons of water, if you can envision that. And what's really kind of ironic in all of this is at the southernmost end of the ecosystem in Florida Bay, there's a lack of fresh water that's killing Florida Bay. We had more than 50,000 acres of the bay that supported dense seagrass beds that really are the critical habitat for many of the fish that we associate in the recreational fishing industry, lost because the bay was too salty. The loss of that habitat, the decomposition of all that grass led to the initiation of algal blooms in Florida Bay that you can see in the satellite image. This is actually a MODIS satellite image showing that green plume of water that was the result of that algal bloom passing just to the lower part of Long Key. So this was a substantial event related to the fact that we're not getting enough fresh water moving south. We have a restoration plan. We know that in order to fix the Caloosahatchee and the St. Lucie problem and to provide for the flows of Everglades National Park, we need to send that water south. But at the same time, we have populations and agriculture living all around the ecosystem, whether it's in Palm Beach County or Miami-Dade County. So the challenge is providing the water that the Everglades needs, but also making sure that we don't flood these areas and ensure that we have the water supply needed. And this is an important component of the Everglades Restoration Plan that a lot of people don't realize, is that these assurances are part of the plan. They were built into it. More locally, one of our challenges is Tamiami Trail. This was a road constructed in the 1920s. To the north is the water conservation area that's holding water. To the south is Everglades National Park. That water historically would flow and equalize from one side to the other. With Tamiami Trail in place, we have a damming effect where water piles up to the north and we're not getting enough to the south. Many of you might know that we've built a 1-mile bridge along Tamiami Trail to help us to move that water into the park, and we're actually constructing a 2.5-mile bridge right now. So if you've been out to Shark Valley or further west on Tamiami Trail, you've seen this construction footprint. So it's really exciting that we're making progress in this area. There's also been a lot of talk in the Florida legislature, you've probably seen it in the Miami Herald or some of the other local news outlets, about the planning for storage that's currently underway and the need for storage in Everglades Restoration. That's the most critical component. And really, it's almost a prosthesis within the system, and my animation here is taking over, but what we're aiming for is storage south of Lake Okeechobee, because this allows us to move water away from those discharges currently to the east and the west, and so we can send that flow, clean it, and put it back in the Everglades all the way to Florida Bay where it went historically. And we've done modeling exercises to show very clearly that this is the path forward, and this is what's being considered currently in the legislative session in Tallahassee.
I love hearing Stephen speak because he seems to be able to explain things to me in ways that I can grasp. There's been so much written about the restoration for the last 15 years. I like the way you can kind of make sense of it for us. Can you tell us why it's taking so long and a little bit more about the recent legislative actions?
Sure. We've had the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan in place since 2000. It's 2017 now, and we're still yet to complete a significant environmental restoration project associated with that. We've broken ground on a number of projects around the periphery. We've made some progress in areas like Collier County and the Picayune Strand project, which is an important habitat restoration project. But really, the most politically challenging projects are those that provide that significant environmental lift of moving Lake Okeechobee water to the south. It involves just politically hot-button issues related to land acquisition and especially acquisition of agricultural land. So that has been the challenge. We've got a Senate president currently who's made this his priority. He is his constituencies in Martin County, who's been dealing with the toxic algae and the discharges from the lake. So we're optimistic that we can see some progress in the very near future of these more challenging issues that not only solve the issue of too much water up north, but also really provide for that need of fresh water down to Everglades National Park where it's so desperately needed. And so that's really what's happening currently in Tallahassee is consideration of that Senate Bill 10 that was passed just a few weeks ago, and now it's in the House.
Thank you, Steve. We're going to come back to you in a few minutes. At this point, I would like to talk a little bit about Getting the Water Right, which is an ethnographic and photographic collaboration documenting people, places, and ideas impacted by the political and economic fallout of water flow policy in the Everglades. Adam Nadel's photographs were printed on weatherproof media and installed in 5 locations in the park, such as historic buildings and natural areas as well. This is a collaboration managed by AIRIE for the park, with direct financial support from the Florida Humanities Council, who I'm so pleased to say are with us today. Patricia and Keith, could you raise your hand? Give these folks a round of applause. Patricia and Keith came all the way from St. Petersburg, Florida for several events this weekend, and we're so happy to have their support and have them with us today. So this is also, fieldwork was supported by the National Science Foundation, Magnum Foundation, UCLA's Laboratory for Environmental Narrative Strategies, and the Puffin Foundation. So I think my first question would go to you, Jessica, but of course, Adam, please chime in if you feel it's something more appropriate for the work. What's the importance of the point emphasized in the exhibit that the Everglades always have been a human landscape?
Thank you. So one of the remarkable things that people do, although we can forget that it's remarkable, is make categories through which we understand the world. And one of those categories is nature, right? It's a category through which we understand the world in which we live. The Everglades is a human landscape, and part of my work is to try to tell the human stories of the Everglades. And the reason that's important is because too often people's existence in the world is overlooked when we think about ecological restoration, not necessarily in the science, but certainly in the kind of popular perceptions and often the policies and laws that govern restoration. So we're trying to tell the story of people who live in the Everglades, live with the Everglades on a day-to-day basis. And the reason why the Everglades is such an important place to tell that story is because the Everglades as an ecosystem is relatively young, and there's always been people living in the Everglades. So if the ecosystem is, ballpark 5,000 years old, there's been human habitation here for a very long time. There's interesting archaeological research suggesting that people who lived here actually helped shape some of the features of the Everglades that we take to be so distinctive. And insofar as that's true, it really puts pressure on us to say, restore to when, restore to whose, restore to what? How do we think about restoration, and how do we see it visually, which I'll pass the baton to Adam here. How do we see it? How do we write about it? If we don't write people out of the story, but we assume that people always have been in the Everglades, people always will be in the Everglades, people are of the Everglades, people are the Everglades. How would that change the way we think about not just Everglades restoration, but about ecological restoration more generally? It's my contention that taking seriously the role of humans always in landscapes might guide us to better grapple with one another and with the hard task of making law and policy that would both account for all of the ecological processes that need to be accounted for, and also understand those as also human, right? So we want to see the Everglades and think about the Everglades as a human landscape. Not only a human landscape, of course, and certainly the flip side of what I'm trying to say, or one could criticize me for saying, we should foreground humans over others, and don't we already do that too much? That's not what I'm trying to say. It's to see humans as part of the story, not the driver of the story, not the dominating species, but as part of the story. And so my work talks to people, I do lots of interviews, I hang around a lot with people to understand what they value in water, why they care about it, and how it helps them to be who they are.
Thank you, Jessica. So succinct. My question for you, Adam, I think will lead you to discuss a few of the slides that I have coming up next, which is how do photography and anthropology work together now and historically, and what are some of the pitfalls and promises of that collaboration? And by the way, I have pictures of the site-specific work you'll see behind us coming up, and also the ones with text underneath them. So you can explain as they go by.
Well, both photography and anthropology were sort of born historically at the same time. And both, I think, for the last 150 years, have aggressively wanted to use science facts as a way to add validity to what they're arguing or discussing. This was particularly problematic in retrospect when you examine the first uses of photography with anthropology, because at that time, was eugenic? Yeah, there was a really strong theme of eugenics. So the scientific was understood as a scientific medium of photography, aggressively sort of supported this point of view by anthropology. And what we're doing here is really a counterpoint, an aggressive reaction to that, which I'm trying to use the aesthetic power of my medium of photography as a vehicle to highlight many of the significant historical and anthropological messages which are important to understand, to have a more holistic understanding of water, the Everglades, and ultimately perhaps the future of our species on this planet.
When collaborating on getting the water right, what were the similarities and differences in telling stories ethnographically versus visually?
Okay. I mean, there's a fundamental tension in storytelling. Photography is if my ancient Greek is good, is essentially photo and to draw. And ethnography is groups or people and writing or study. So ultimately, there are two different sides of a coin. So the question is, how do you then collaborate with someone to emphasize the power of each medium to its fullest, and without compromising the integrity of the project as a whole? And if I may, I think that the best way to understand our collaboration was when we started. Jessica said to me, I actually have no idea how photographers work in the field, and actually I could kind of understand where she was coming from. And I was, you probably don't know, I was trained as an anthropologist, and I said to Jessica, there's a reason why I'm not an anthropologist, because I actually don't understand much about anthropology. I'm really horribly confused. So I think by kind of approaching the project with such, transparency and honesty and very little id, really allowed for both of us to creatively interact and to produce the bits and pieces that you're seeing on the screen.
So I now reflect on how I used photography in earlier work of mine more, with critical eyes, because I too often thought of photography as something that would illustrate or document the kinds of arguments or points I was making through text, right, or through facts that I was writing down. And so there were times in our collaboration when we'd be talking about the themes that this work would illustrate, and I would say to Adam, I really want to get this idea in somewhere. Do you have an image that would make sense with it? And he would look at me like I was a complete lunatic, since that's not how he worked. And then conversely, he would have these amazing images, and I would say, right, but what do we want to say about them? And it took a long time for me to understand that he says things with images that aren't textual points, right? And that some of the things that I wanted to say textually didn't have to correspond directly to images. And that part of what we ended up doing was, I would write and incorporate concepts that mattered to me, and he would curate the images, and sometimes they don't match perfectly, and that became, I think, a point of sort of creative tension in a good way about the exhibition.
I think that makes perfect sense, and I, for one, am so glad that you did collaborate on this. Adam, I think I have 4 or 5 more slides from the exhibition coming up next, if you would like to guide us with a sentence or two about each. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I can. That's the beauty of having the captions, though. So this was shot where Jessica actually did the majority of her research. So this was sort of the foci when I first went into the field, and Jessica was so gracious to introduce a year and a half of intense study and investment in this area. so I started here, and this is sugarcane, and the next image is burning sugarcane. But what I quickly discovered, and I explained to it, in part it's my inability to sometimes, you could argue, aesthetically illustrate Jessica's points, is it has to do in part with my limitations as a photographer. And I wanted to try to do my strengths. So this is the Clewiston area, and then I expand. This is right outside Clewiston. But my project ultimately started at Disneyland and then went all the way to the Bay, because that's the best way that I felt like I was making a coherent conversation, visual conversation. And then Jessica, and it was fantastic working with her to then get the intellectual content to match up, even though it wasn't initially in her sort of scope.
You pulled me out of my comfort zone.
And just one more message of like collaboration. I think this is really super important. Probably one of the most important people in the room now, who's responsible for the installation, is actually Ted, who's right there. Ted, who moved these our idea in through the park bureaucracy, and I say that in the best sense of the word, to allow it to flourish. And that also extends obviously to AIRIE and our partners at the Florida Humanities Council, and the list goes on and on. So the collaboration is here, but it's an enormous collaboration, and I think I mean, you guys were great too. I talked to a bunch of you guys. Really helped me out a lot, and actually gave me the map that was there that I could then copy.
With that, I would like to make that formal shout out to Ranger Ted Firkins. He's not in uniforms. Would you stand up, please, Ted? Thank you. Ted has many duties as Pine Island overseeing the whole district down there, and one of those is to work so closely with AIRIE, and I'm so grateful for our collaboration on all of the artist work, and thank you and welcome to your daughter. Thank you for attending today, all the way from the Keys, the Florida Keys. The last image I have of yours, Adam and Jessica, is this installation at the historic Flamingo gas station, which everybody seems to just love, including myself. Would you like to tell us a little bit about the challenges of installing in such a humid area? You know, I mean, people keep saying to me, what did they print on, and how is that staying on the walls? It's quite extraordinary.
Actually, probably the biggest challenge, and Ted got stung actually, was dealing with a hornet's nest, which was up on the corner there. I mean, when you curate for it, it's a bit ambitious to try to curate for an environment which is exposed to weather. So what's mostly used here is two approaches. One, materials that were designed for for trade shows. They're really heavy duty. And then you find a printer who can kind of maximize the image quality. And the second is actually the physically express the installations where there's less exposure to the elements proper. And what's kind of wonderful about that is that I kind of come from a school, like an older school of artistic approach, which is like the more limitations which are put upon me, the better I do. So the fact that we are severely limited, and I felt limited what we could do in this area because of weather, and also some historical presentations, like for me, actually allowed me to I think do a better job.
And if I can just jump in on that, that dovetailed then thematically with the site at Flamingo, which is an environment that severely constrains what people can do there. And so this set of images was also connected to things that are visible and invisible, and the way people had to hide and move through that particular space. So there's some stuff that's linked to climate change. There's some stuff that's linked to human smuggling, to the smuggling of commodities. The sort of history of human habitation of this area is kind of called out a little bit in this as well. So it's thinking of this as the constraints on the art, and also this environment as constraining, and also allowing for certain kinds of creativity in the history of human activity in the Everglades.
Can I see a show of hands? How many people in the room have actually been down to Flamingo? Not bad. I commend you. It's far. It's about 48, 48 miles from the entrance of the southern entrance of the Everglades National Park. It's a bit of a commitment. There are lots of bugs, but you will be rewarded with amazing, amazing vistas. And if you're out on the water, the dolphins and fish can just be life-changing. With that, I'm going to transition to another use of the Flamingo gas station by artist Valerie George. Valerie was with us last year and took to photographing many things in the park and then projecting them onto the Mission 66 architecture in the park at night. So that's a very different view that you're seeing behind me right now of the Flamingo gas station. We hope to show Valerie's work next year in the AIRIE nest. Which brings me to Mr. Ramos. You're looking at a slide behind us of a famous expedition with a Goodyear blimp that included Mr. Fairchild and Ernest F. Coe on the first Everglades party, I think they called it. But what they were really trying to do is identify the need for preservation of our wild lands. And if we take that old image into the present, I'm going to open for you by saying the presence of art both in and outside of the park accomplishes many ideals, not the least of which highlights our artists' ability to address the cultural history through literary and visual means. AIRIE fellow Mark Dion recently created a permanent installation at the Kampong in David Fairchild's study, which is like stepping into a portal at the turn of the century. It is particularly poignant because together with Mr. Coe, Mr. Fairchild was instrumental in gathering people to establish the need for the Everglades National Park. Now that AIRIE is 16 years old, what do you think is the strongest asset or result of the park-AIRIE relationship?
Well, happy sweet 16, I guess.
Thank you. It's past our quince, right?
Exactly. It's a real treat to be here, first of all. Great choice in terms of the panel. Having Steve here is important. Science, I always tell people when I'm thinking out loud and thinking big, you know, science really is what guides us, and art is what inspires us. So I thank AIRIE for that inspiration for 16 years. It has been an amazing ride. And looking back on it, you know, if I were to point in the direction of the most important contribution, it's got to be people. It has to be people. And it comes down to the artists that have come through the program year after year creating their work. As they come through the program, they leave ambassadors to these great landscapes that we have down here in South Florida. Their work remains and continues to do that work wherever it is exhibited. And then on top of that, all of the people that are touched, that are inspired by those artists and their work, I like to think that they also somehow, sometimes in a big way or in a small way, they also become ambassadors to these great places that we are protecting down here for everybody and trying to restore. And you know, I tell people often that what keeps me up at night is not necessarily this enormous challenge that we have in front of us. And Steve, you framed it very nicely. I love how you talk science in a way that everybody can understand. Not every scientist has that ability. It's an enormous responsibility that we have to get the water right for this place. But I know that there's a ton of science, there's a lot of smart people that are behind this, and we know what to do. You know, Steve spoke about the 1 mile bridge. We've got a 2.5 mile bridge being constructed as we speak. CEP, Central Everglades, was authorized in December, and that's really what's going to ultimately bring water down to Florida Bay. and make that bay more resilient so that things like what Steve was talking about do not happen as often. And so this is important, but what keeps me up at night is this ability or lack thereof that we have as an agency sometimes, perhaps because we are a bureaucratic agency, just like every other agency in government, to connect with people. And we have been struggling a little bit with connecting with all Americans. Demographics of our country have been changing, or some might say that they've changed, yet we have not been able to keep up with those changes in terms of making those connections with those communities around the country that really own these places as much as the rest of us. And so that's what keeps me up at night. That's what preoccupies me, and that's why, as the superintendent for Everglades and Dry Tortugas, I put a lot of emphasis in trying to not only find ways, but provide my team. And by the way, we also have Maria Thompson here. Please, Maria, stand up and be recognized, who's out there helping us make that connection with the community, for us to get creative and find ways to speak the language that people speak, regardless of what that language might be. And that's why I love this program so much, because not only is it perhaps the premier #1 artist program in the National Park System in its 100 years, but because it is a creative, inspiring, fun, practical, all of those adjectives that you could use to describe it, way to connect with folks in a way that is personal, in a way that is unique, in a way that means something perhaps different slightly to everybody, to the other person that is exposed to this wonderful art. And we need to do more of it. And I'm just grateful for the work that you all do and the artists for inspiring us all and helping us see the Everglades through a different lens.
Thank you. Thank you, Pedro. So a few years back, in 2011, with Oh Miami, we had poetry banners all over the park, and you were at Big Cypress, as was I back then. It was a much easier project, I think, to get off the ground than getting the water right, which is at 5 different site-specific locations, and also the content is quite different. It's extremely unusual for a national park to authorize site-specific art exhibits, given the environmental compliance hoops that we had to jump through, for example.
Bureaucracy.
Yes. So do you feel like everything your team had to go through to approve this exhibit was worth it, given that some of the content could be unsettling or a little surprising to the average park visitor?
I think it's definitely worth it every time that we can push the envelope and really do things differently to get to some of these goals that I'm speaking about. It's worth it as long as we don't break the law or do anything inappropriate. I've got a great team of people that are willing to be open-minded. This compliance work that you mentioned is important, and it's in place for a reason. These places are public places. They belong to all people, so compliance is there to make sure that the work that we do does not impact adversely the natural and the cultural resources that we're here to protect. So there's a place for that. But, in the last 100 years of history of the National Park Service, we truly have been bounded by tradition. And we have, because of that tradition, have experienced amazing success. We just celebrated Centennial last year, and we kind of went through the process for a year long of review of all of that success. But I feel that we're a little too bounded by tradition, and sometimes doing this sort of thing and pushing the envelope is what we have to do to break loose from some of that tradition so that we can face the more modern and current challenges that we have today. And, it takes courage, it takes determination, it takes a little bit of risk. And that's what my team and I are trying to do so that we can make a difference and also serve as somewhat of a model to the other 416 National Park Service units that are out there grappling with the same exact issues that we grapple with down here in South Florida.
Thank you. Very succinct. Thank you. Behind me, you see a beautiful picture of Jenny Larson that I took when she was rehearsing. I just had to put that in because it expresses so well what a lot of our artists feel during their residency, is that ability just to get out in the field and walk. And with that, I pivot to Elisabeth. And Adrian gave such a nice biography of your work. I don't even have to introduce the Shanghai concept, your work in China. Also, Elisabeth is represented locally by Emerson Dorsch, so you can see her work frequently there in exhibitions. What I want to ask you, Elisabeth, is while researching for your AIRIE residency, you were very inspired by the vivid prose in River of Grass, where Marjorie Stoneman Douglas gives a ripping account of the utter destruction of draining and the riveting fire of 1945. I think it's the 11th hour chapter, right? We were talking about that?
It is indeed.
Yeah. How did the residency nurture awareness of the environment, and how did Everglades, as opposed to Shanghai, impact your work?
Well, compared to Shanghai, it's pretty radical difference. I have often, for many years, worked from a sense of place, since about 2003, and so for a long time it was really about a sense of travel. And in Shanghai, and then I'll go to residencies as a kind of field research, and the work I make there translates into studio work. That's a more distilled account of places I go. So after 6 months in Shanghai, which was highly artificial, and the biggest piece of nature I saw was the hotel logo of a plant blooming repeatedly in neon across in the Pudong New Business area. I was living on the Bund. So coming to the Everglades was quite a shock. Stoneman Douglas is quite a raconteur, beautiful writer, it's like poetry, and other books like Swamp and Mirage that tell more about political accounts of the Everglades are also really beautifully written in their own ways. But I think that what I found here was that text falls away in the end. It creates layers of resonance within the space, but there comes a point at which the interaction with the space is entirely visual and embodied through painting, because that's what I do. And so, but those accounts of the Everglades and have resonance within the landscape as encrypted layers, if you will, of my consciousness of associations to the space, as well as the events that happen in the space itself. Well, I wasn't there for the fire. Reading about the fire tore at my heart. The dead orchids, the small animals, in a way that being in the landscape accentuates, if that makes sense. You know, you're not there, but you know it happened. And so the space is forever changed because of that. So the space deepens with those associations.
Thank you. We've talked a little bit about the fact that we exist in an information-saturated world, and you alluded to that talking about some text in your readings. Can you explain further how the written word influences your work and how you translate that when you pour and make marks on the canvases? I'm putting up Mangrove Periphyton right now, for example.
Okay, well, I'm going to have to move it from the written to the spoken word, because one of the most interesting things about the Everglades is that it has a very aggressive, and I mean that in the best sense, educational program with the rangers and the educators, the interpreters, you know, Department of Interpretation. So nature is being interpreted through spoken word. So I had several forays into the landscape with Jimmy Sadel and Steve Tennis, and also Keith Waddington, and all different things, slogging and activities you may know about, so I may not have to enumerate them. But anyway, in their elucidation of what was happening, which, because I'm just completely absorbed by shape or color or, you know, the way an atmosphere feels, I didn't know anything really about the environment, and they taught me a lot, especially about periphyton. And so in making this painting, I had come back and I had embarked on this painting, thinking about mangroves and their rhizomic structure and how kind of sexy it would be to make a gesture of it, you know, to sort of not draw it, but incorporate it somehow into mark making. And when I came back, I felt free to sort of ruin this painting, just throw crap all over it, because that's what the periphyton looked like. You know, and it's such a low nutrient, such a low-level nutrient for these plants, these scrappy survivors, that it was pretty exciting to just lay that on, and it set me free. That's the ironic thing, you know. In painting, you just get set free when you just ruin something. So it became a very lively and active exploration through spoken word, as well as the layers and associations of written word. I think that describes it.
It does,
Yeah.
and it kind of leads to the description of your current exhibition with AIRIE, in which I wrote, with your help, of course, that it was influenced by the research on microclimates between half-inch shifts in topography to engage your sense of layering pigments with water. We're going to kind of move laterally over to, is it This Land Is Your Land that they're seeing behind us? This gorgeous painting. Beautiful, beautiful work that we have up right now. I'll tell you about the project in a moment. Is there something you could share with us about this painting?
Well, this painting is an older painting, pre-Everglades actually, but it's the first painting to incorporate the Everglades in the collage elements of tree sketches from my sketchbook, cypress trees on the side of the road. So this is kind of a travelogue painting that moves between multiple locations. Brooklyn, Yaddo in upstate New York, which is another artist residency, and then the, not Tamiami Trail, but you know, the big road. Thank you. The big road with the ditches in it. So, so anyway, it's kind of a travelogue, and I often want to compress time, like association, into a painting, where time moves in flat layers, like an operating system or a screen or something, because that's how time is embedded in painting, and it's how it's embedded in layers of pouring watercolor, or in this case, acrylic paint. But in this painting also, I wanted to move laterally and establish a system of beats with the canvases to kind of mark time and travel across the canvas. And so those are some facts about this painting.
One of the interesting things which gets to occur with most of our residents is they're allowed to go into the archives in the South Florida Collections Management Center. The items you see behind me were influential, most of them anyway, to Elisabeth's current work, such as a hand-drawn map by Dan Beard in 1952, in which he actually is very concerned about salinity intrusion. So here we are, 67 years later, still talking about the same thing. So I'm very, very pleased that we are now working with the agency to help exhibit some of the items that are previously behind closed doors, and only folks who are in the residency or have specific interesting projects can get permission to see. So we're very, very happy about that. Where can you see them? I'm so glad you asked. Well, the AIRIE Nest is the renovation and first year of the AIRIE Nest, located in the Ernest F. Coe Visitors Center, is supported by a $50,000 grant from the Night Arts Challenge. The gallery represents a major step forward with our relationship with the Everglades National Park, as it is highly unusual for a contemporary art gallery to be embedded within a national park, and even more so for both entities to commit to exhibiting genre-bending collaborations between artists and scientists. So, we are beyond thrilled to say that we did the renovation in a month, Pedro. And you'll see the before and after there are quite stunning.
We don't get to do anything in a month,
I
so
did.
congratulations.
Private enterprise, Pedro.
I need to learn
Awesome.
something from you.
No, we're just thrilled with how it came out. We were able to close 5 doors and make one long wall to support Elisabeth's gorgeous painting. and also build a mobile wall, which we can paint and put wallpaper on and destroy and do almost anything to support our artists' work. So we're just absolutely thrilled to introduce you to the AIRIE Nest, which opens to the public tomorrow at 2 p.m. with Blooming World, Elisabeth's show. It's a group of 11 wondrous nature-based paintings with pores of color. Items on loan from the South Florida Collections Management are very important to really give you all an idea of what the artists experience when they're in residency and how that translates. We have programming covered for a couple of years, but we're seeking more grant funds to cover that. So at this time, if there are any questions that you can think of for my group, it's a wonderful opportunity to ask the scientists, anthropologists, and artists something that we may not have covered for you. Adrienne's going to take the microphone out if you'd like to flag her down. Anybody? Have we covered everything?
I want to go get some paraphyton and go throw it someplace with you.
I threw paint.
If you're a
But
board
let's do
member,
it.
would you raise your hand?
We need to go back to the park together and
Board
I
members,
need to
raise your
learn
hand.
something.
I'd like to give a shout out to Valerie Grace Ricordi, our new president, and BJ Sheffield, our vice president, and I see Jim Peel here. Also, I think Nick had a question. What is it, Nick?
Hi, I just wanted to ask about the 1 mile bridge that's been constructed. Have you been able to measure much progress or seen the effects of that yet in the southern end?
Well, I'm sure Superintendent Ramos can talk about this as well, but the bridge is allowing us to move a significant quantity of water into Northeast Shark River Slough, which is an area that hasn't been Everglades National Park since the beginning. It was actually acquired in the late 80s, and so that area has been dry for a significant amount of time, and really going back to when that road was built in the 20s. That's the oldest stretch of Tamiami Trail, very low lying. So yes, we have moved a significant quantity of water under that bridge this past year, especially because we were under emergency operations. If you recall the record rainfall we got at the end of 2015 into 2016, they were allowed to raise water levels in the canal there to the point where we could move, I think, over 200,000 acre feet of water, which is, imagine 200,000 acres with 1 foot of water. It was a substantial amount of water for that year. And the 2.5 mile bridge that's being constructed now mentioned the Central Everglades plan. It will pair with that project to allow us to move even more water into that area of the park. That it's huge in terms of the habitat benefits for that area and all the way down through Shark River Slough.
That area has been the poster child for why is it that we need to do what we're doing, and and why the American people is choosing to spend upwards of $20 billion in these projects, the largest ecologic restoration project in the history of the planet. It's a big deal. And right there is the epicenter of where you see what's been going on. There are times when you drive that road, if you're going west and you look to the right-hand side of the car to the north, and there is water, and then you look to the left towards the park, and the park is dying of thirst. That road has had that impact now for decades. So you can imagine, the amount of water that we need and the complexity of doing so, because now we have a built environment, so we can't just let it rip, as they say. It has to be done in a particular way.
Mm-hmm. By the way, Nick Gilmore is, who asked the question, is in residence with us this summer, and we're working on details for your outreach project. Come out, I think June 11th we decided on, Nick, and do a workshop with us in the AIRIE Nest where you can see Elisabeth's work and work on some sculpting together. We're very, very excited about that. Yes, So AIRIE was founded for artists by artists to ensure that there will always be a place for artists in the Everglades. In the past 15 years, both artists and their audience awareness of ecological issues, especially with respect to coastal ecosystems and water rights, has increased tremendously. We are growing and expanding to meet those needs, and with the continued support from grants, corporate and private individuals, AIRIE's Residency and Nest Gallery will provide cross-disciplinary projects by artists who want to live and work on the front lines of climate change in the wilderness of the Everglades. If you are an artist or you know a friend who might be right for the program, applications are currently being accepted at AIRIE.org. We close that opportunity at midnight on June 1st, so please spread the word for us. I know that, Elisabeth, you have work going up in the airport in Tampa, don't you?
Yes.
Yes.
At the end of next month.
So if you're flying through Tampa, please look for, is it like a 10-foot by 10-foot painting? Right?
8-foot international arrivals.
Okay, great, great. And Adam, I know the show was at the Peabody Museum at Yale and I believe up in northern Florida. Are there any plans for the show to travel from here forward?
Well, it's currently in Jessica's garage in LA, and so for her sake, hopefully it goes up in a couple of months. But we're still kind of finalizing the few details for the Los Angeles venue. But we'll let you know.
Oh, I hope so. Also, tomorrow at 4 o'clock, Jessica and Adam will be at the Vizcaya Garage. It's such an amazing venue, discussing getting the water right with some special guests, including folks who are in the exhibit. You have Jim Shore from Seminole, right, and Molly Gardner.
Yeah,
right?
Molly Gardner from Clewiston, the city commissioner. Jim Shore actually had a conflict, but Joe Frank is coming in his place, who's quoted in the exhibit as well. So yeah, we'll have both of them.
Free and open to the public at 4 o'clock tomorrow at Vizcaya Garage, right? Additionally, if you're interested in getting a poster for the show, talk to Adam after the panel. He has some beautiful, beautiful pieces he's printed up. Can we think of anything else except from Janice Angel, our new Director of Development? Will you stand up, Janice? We're so glad to have Janice on board. Janice was on our board of directors for 3 years and has just stepped aside to work with us in development. We're thrilled. She told me it would help us so much if you could possibly complete a survey upon your exit and leave it with the staff at PAMM or with Janice. That would just be very, very helpful to all of our grants. Is there anything else? Are we finished, Jessica?
I guess the last thing I just want to say is that when we think about the people of the Everglades, one thing I didn't say and should have said immediately is that the Everglades mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And one perspective that's really important to keep in mind is not just in the park, but even right here, that we are on indigenous lands, and that history is critical to the way we understand not just reservations or rural places, but also cities, and think about what does it mean that we all live in some kind of complicated relationship to the Everglades. And so I just want to open that idea up and also call your attention to some work at the Atataki Seminole Museum, where they've been doing some work around water and Everglades. They just had a water program, and I know they're going to be doing some installations as well. So that's another place to see art about the Everglades.
I love hearing you speak. I would like to take one of your classes. It's just so well put. We would like to thank the staff at PAMM, the Miami-Dade Department of Cultural Affairs, and the Florida Humanities Council, and of course the Knight Foundation for helping us move forward every single day with these projects. And to all of you for coming out today, thank you so much.